wonder, are you going to mention the Super Bowl? Jesus won. It's all over. So that's it. So moving on from there. Thank you for being here today. I think I'm going to enjoy this one. Sunday morning, February the 4th, Gideon. This is the 2018 Gideon series. Last year we spoke on Gideon and focused mostly on Gideon. This year I've been focusing on the 300. I think it has a lot of parallels in a very specific sense to us at New Covenant in this time period when we are a bit less than more and we still have major tasks ahead of us. And I believe it's always applicable to everybody in their life. And that's my intent this morning, to focus mostly on the everybody. It's always applicable in our life. Probably my real title is All In. All in. And I mean by that, my focus is more on individually. You got to be all in. Yes, for everybody. Let's all be in. I would love that. But for you individually, be all in. So here we go. We've been talking about the 300. Each of them were given 3 instruments. They were given a trumpet. I'm positive it was a ram's horn. They were given a clay pot. They may have been smaller than these, bigger than these. And they were given a torch. The torch was held within that clay pot. They were to stand on the rim surrounding 130,000 plus of the Midianites. Midian means strife. In most of the places I looked it up, its definition is that of strife. So they were surrounding this huge boiling pot of strife that had its intention of conquering the land for moving into 8 years. And so they were going to stand on the rim surrounding that, 300 of them versus 130,000. And they were going to use those torches, but they were going to be held initially. And they were all in, meaning to get to that point, to get there, they had to be all in, meaning there was some 32,000 Israelites who responded to Gideon's call, come, let's do something about the Midianites who are coming to take over our land again, steal our crops, take our animals. Let's do something. And 32,000 responded, and God told him, you have way too many. So he said, tell all those who are afraid. If you're afraid, if this makes you scared, if you're apprehensive, if you just got the willies, then you can go home. So a whole bunch went home. Only 10,000 were left. A whole bunch, 22,000 went home because they were afraid. It's not time. I don't believe there's too many of them. They may have had an inkling of how many of the Midianites there were, and they went home. But there were 10,000 who said, I'm here. I'm in. But they were something else that God was sort of sifting for those who would stand. And in essence, I believe they're qualities, they're traits that you and I need to adopt as we stand on the rim in our lives when we're standing for whatever it is, the huge obstacle that we're facing, the mountain that we're facing, the enemy, the huge enemy we feel we're facing, the sickness, disease that we're dealing with our own body. The enemy can be the financial distress, the job that just never seems to materialize, and it just seems to be impossible to obtain the kind of job that you want. I don't know what the Midianites represent in your life personally, in my life personally. They're different. But those 300 first made the decision to be all in. They second made a decision to stay focused. God said to Gideon, you got too many, so take them down to a stream, and I'm going to show you which ones to select out of the 10,000 who said they rose above fear, and they were not going to succumb to fear. They stayed focused through the whole, so to speak, journey. They took them down to a pond, and nearly 9,700 of them lay down on their stomach and just put their head in the water and just kind of sucked up the water that way, oblivious for those moments, those minutes, oblivious to what was going on, totally not alert. Versus there were only 300 that lapped water. It appears they stayed on their knees. They brought water up to their mouth. They were still focused. They didn't think the enemy was about to charge, but it didn't make any difference. They stayed focused. I believe those are two qualities. If you're all in, if you're going to be able to deal with and respond to when is it time to say, come here, and when is it time to toss it away from you and, in essence, tell the devil, go sick him. You have to, one, be all in. It's not, I'm going to sort of give this a try, and you have to stay focused. And I found those in themselves are a journey, and they're a maturing journey. And I find that in my life now, they're more called for than ever before. They've been called for my whole life, but more than ever before. So they stood on the rim. This is where I stand. So when they were standing there, they had already embodied those things. That they were included. I'm in. And number two, they were focused. And then they were given the resources that they would have, the trumpet, the pitcher, the clay pot, and the torch. They were given the resources, and they were said, we're going to go stand on the rim right above them. Probably at midnight, when the changing of the guard used to take place. That's probably where it was. How close they were to those 50,000, 60,000 tents. Maybe there were 2 Midianites in each one. 25,000 tents, maybe 4 or 5 men in each one. I don't know. I don't know how close they were, but we were left with the impression they were not far away. This is where I stand. What took place was both a declaration to God and this is where I am. I am all in. At that time, they were standing on the very edge. So if you're pursuing healing or you're pursuing a job, you're pursuing God is going to be the one over your finances. I am all in. Your stand, and there's no doubt about it. How are you doing? I had lunch with one of my kids in the past couple of weeks, and they were talking about how they were preparing now for their financial future. And I asked them, do you tithe every week? Are you starting with tithing? That's how you build your whole financial base, is you start with tithing. And I was trying to say to him, to you, if you're wanting to say, God, my whole financial structure, future, is going to be based on you, then start with tithing. Honor him. Give him an opportunity to rebuke the devourer for your sake. There are so many promises that he has offered to us in his word. That takes faith. And there are times, not to promote it in terms of how wonderful I am, but it's a stand you take. Yes, tithing. I tithe. I tithe regularly. I tithe every paycheck. I tithe every week. This is where I stand. That's the point. So I'm going to mostly tell the story of 2 people who came to Jesus for healing. But what they did was this is where they stood, and they stayed standing there, regardless of very different factors. They were all in. That's the point. But we're starting from the 300. They were all in. There they were on the edge. This is where I stand. So there were these 4 ways that they were broadcasting, so to speak. This is where they were. The Midianites the enemy didn't have to have any wonder, where are they? What's their position? Where do they stand? What are they believing? How are they approaching this? Because what they did, they blew the trumpet. They sounded the trumpet as they watched Gideon do it. Yes, I know that was the way in the Old Testament. God said, if the enemy comes into your land and he's seeking to take your land, sound the trumpet, and I will hear that, and I will intervene on your part. I'm positive that's what they were doing. But that sound of that trumpet also recognized them. There wasn't any doubt. Where is the enemy? Oh, they're blowing trumpets. I know where they are. It was beyond that. It was the sound of breaking the pots. The lights, the torches were for a short time period, however long that was, within those pots. They crashed those pots. If you didn't know where they were, you could hone in a little closer. I hear a trumpet blowing. Oh, I heard clanging of a clay pot breaking. And then there's these torches that I'm positive were raised high. The sight of the torch, there was, and if that wasn't enough, they were yelling a declamation, the sword of the Lord, and Gideon too. There was no doubt where they were standing. That is the point. There absolutely no doubt. There are times where God had them hide and wait in other kind of military endeavors. But this particular one, there was no hiding. There was none. That's where they were. That's where they were standing. That was their position. It's a magnificent moment. So I like it in the New Living Translation. Then all three groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held their blazing torches in their left hands and the horns in their right hands. And they all shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Just reading this scenario out of the New Living Translation. Each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed around in panic, shouting as they ran to escape. And when the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other. Those odds required the Lord to intervene. How was it going to happen? In the natural, they blew a trumpet, and God had the enemy turn on itself with their own swords. We never know how God is going to bring about the aid that he has given to us, but he asks us to stand there and keep our eyes on him, and in this instance, make it clear where you are, even when the circumstances really make that difficult. To fight against each other with the sword. Those who were not killed fled, and the rest of that verse tells the different towns that they fled to. And then Numbers 10, when you go, I read this last week, when you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpet, and you will be remembered before the Lord your God, and you will be saved from your enemies. And said that in studying that last week, I asked the Lord, your land has been very important to me. I intended to put a picture of Trixie up there. You would have had to been here last week to understand that. I took it. It's actually on my phone. Josh, can you do me a favor? Can you come down here and can you take my phone and there's a picture in my gallery on my phone of pictures that I've taken, and I think it's the last picture that I took. There's 2 or 3. Can you take the one that's the clearest and let me know, just say up there, just let me know I have Trixie's picture, because I wanted you to see this wonder that Faye trained to protect our territory. Faye reminded me that he, before the change, before Faye drug him around our property, our acre, and said, you coward, this is your land, you are to protect it now. And so I'm demanding that this is it. Here's where the boundaries are. She said in the bed that Trixie had was next to the wall, and she said Trixie would go up against the wall and slide down the wall onto the bed. And just I don't know what the trouble was with that dog, until the day Faye drugged Trixie around our property, our acre, yelping and howling and so on, telling him, this is your property, you're the watchdog of this property, protect it. And I told you the change. Listen to last week's sermon. I told you the change that took place in Trixie. It's amazing. Faye will hire out her services if you need them. So, moving on. So your land, what's our land? This is it. This is the fundamental land. My spirit indwells this house. God gave me this land, so to speak. It's made of dust, of dirt, and it'll go back to dust and dirt. But this is the house. This is the land. This is the land. So when the enemy comes against you, sound the trumpet. Open your mouth. Sound the trumpet. So application, healing. Half-hearted won't work. The application is pursuing healing, and we're pursuing healing. We're retooling on healing. I'm retooling on healing. I think everyone in the room believes, does God heal today? Can God heal today? Yes. Does God heal today? Yes. Will God heal you when you have a need? I don't know that all of us would say, absolutely. He absolutely will do that. And we've had enough of a track record where we need to retool in this. I need to retool. So, the application of standing on the rim in full view, you know it. Your land knows where you're standing. In full view of everybody that's necessary. That's the point, standing on the rim. The application is healing. Half-hearted won't work. There's a fascinating story. Healing, half-hearted won't work. The Midianites, in regard to healing, what may be standing in the way? Your history, maybe, your medical history, your history of praying for people, your history of seeing people prayed for, and the lack of healing that may have taken place. What will stand in your way? Your history can easily stand in your way. The medical establishment, what the medical establishment says can stand in your way. This is such and such and such and such, and there is no recovery from this, or whatever, or this will take this, or you will never, or this will be the end result. The medical establishment may be the Midianites that's standing in your way from your body walking in the full provision of what Jesus purchased for us in his suffering and in the stripes that he bore in his crucifixion and resurrection. It could be the medical establishment. It could be family and friends who, you're what? Aren't you taking, you should, what's wrong with you? Your family and friends and all their ideas and all their thoughts. What can keep people from standing on the rim? Family and friends, the attitudes, the ideas. I don't want to offend so-and-so. How serious you are your circumstances can keep you from, I would do that, but this is so serious what I'm dealing with. This is so overwhelming. I can't fool around with this. Like trusting Jesus is fooling around. And maybe the big one, disappointments. I've tried. I've done this. I've done this. And I understand. I really do understand. I went after healing of my eyes when in my early 20s, and I don't know how long I went. I took my glasses off, wrongly understanding, acting your faith, thinking if I do something that will increase my faith. Acting in faith is acting on something that's already dead rock established in your heart, and you're acting in accordance with, in agreement with what is fully established in your heart. I was, if I think I'm healed, I probably ought to take my glasses off. I don't know how long I went without my glasses. It was months and months and months and months and months. It was strong. Disappointments. Disappointments can keep people from standing on the edge because of what's happened. So I'm going to read. There are 3 accounts of the woman with the issue of blood. It's actually 2 stories are woven together. This is the tale of 2 cities. It's mostly on the woman with the issue of blood, but it's also Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue. It's a fascinating story. I may look at it slightly differently than you have looked at it in the past, than I've looked at it in the past. I may do that. Try not to be offended. Try and hear it all the way through. And I have ready. So the infamous Trixie, can you put the infamous Trixie on the board? So there he is. That's Trixie. That's Heather. Trixie was her dog. I don't know if that was before he got changed by Faye letting him know clearly, this is your land. Protect it. So moving on. Thank you, Josh. You did great. Heather and Trixie. So it's the story of 2 cities. Really, they couldn't have been more polar than they were. How opposite they were, how different they were. At the same time, in the same scenario, these 2 people came to Jesus. And behold, so I'm reading out of the Luke account. There's 3 accounts. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you can find this. One of them is real short, just a couple of verses. 2 of them are a bit longer. I've chosen to focus on the Luke account, though I've borrowed some things out of Mark's because they were left out or they were missing, and they add fullness to the story, to our understanding. So standing on the rim. Here's 2 people who were standing on the rim for healing. Jairus for his 12-year-old daughter who was dying at home. For the unnamed woman with the issue of blood, 12 years, she was standing on the rim for herself. It was totally illegal for her to be there. It was totally illegal. And whatever she touched became unclean. So in some dimensions, for her to say, if I can just touch his garment, then in the Jewish rules and regulations, the law, Jesus would have become unclean. He didn't. What she had to overcome what the ruler of the Jews had to overcome. Two people, both standing on the rim. That's the point. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. So he was a big wig. He was up there. Now, the scribes and Pharisees weren't wild. It didn't say he was a scribe or Pharisee, but he was a ruler of the synagogue. And that meant he had a leading position. That meant he probably knew scribes and Pharisees pretty well. I'm not saying he knew all of them in the land, but he would have known some well. He would have known probably if anybody was an expert in a local synagogue, it's the ruler of the synagogue. He would have known the rules. And Jesus was not particularly embraced by most of the scribes and Pharisees, at least early in Jesus' journey. By the end of his life, there were a fair number of them that had turned to him. But this is fairly early in his journey. So you have Jairus. He's a ruler of the synagogue, but he's got a need. And we know from just a verse or two later that Jesus was not walking just alone with his 12 disciples, just kicking rocks on the dusty road, that he was surrounded by people, and they were pressing in on him. He was crowded. People were all around him. So for him to come and approach Jesus and fall down on his face, he had to deal with all the people. Here he's a ruler. Me, my position, my significance, my prestige, my reputation. He had to deal with all of those. What did he successfully deal with? It was a whole slew of things that Jairus had to deal with, but there was a need that he was facing that enabled him to, he rose above his position, he rose above his reputation, he rose above the opposition of the upper leaders of the synagogue, the temple in Israel. He had to rise above the crowd. He could have said, look at all those people around him, and go and prostrate myself before him. I mean, just really beg before him. He had to rise above that. I remember early in the charismatic day, I had to rise above, do I raise my hand in a room where other people are raising their hand? People might see it. It was awful. I fought a battle of being seen just over raising my hand. And then Faye, who was sitting in front of me, raised her hand. I thought, oh my goodness, it looked like a shovel that she raised up in the air. It was just her hand. That's where I was. That's where my journey began. He overcame those things. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and he begged him to come to his house. He was convinced Jesus was the answer. And he was willing to rise above those things. This is the first city. A little bit more. For he had an only daughter about 12 years of age. So his daughter, approximately 12 years, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. So he had a dying daughter, about 12 years old, and the throng of people, all the people that were there, and he prostrated himself on the floor before Jesus. I've got a daughter at home, she's dying. Would you come to my house? I'm sure it was passionate. I'm sure there wasn't any doubt what he was asking. Now, at the same time, a tale of two cities. So there's another event going on. I am among those who believe Jesus did not know this woman was there in the crowd. Now, you may believe that Jesus had a Honda Candra in the back of his head. And he had been told that morning by the Father, there's going to be a woman there. She's going to have an issue of blood. She's going to come up and she's going to touch your garment. She's going to come from behind. She's going to have a hard time getting through the crowd, but she's going to come. She's going to touch you, so you just be looking for her. So Jesus, as he was walking along, somehow he kept an eye on the Honda camera, backup camera, and even though Jairus was prostrating himself on the ground, begging him to come, because I'm sure he mentioned his daughter who was dying at home. Jesus was waiting. Okay, I'm waiting for, oh, there she is. I see her. There she's coming. I see her making her way through. I do not believe that happened. I believe that the story of the woman with the issue of blood is a look into the future. When Jesus, who is here, he is fully here, but he is not fully here in a manifested form where we see his body and we see the wounds and we see all those things. We see his person. He lives within us in the Holy Spirit, the same Spirit that raised him from the dead. The Spirit of Christ is within us. So he is here. I believe this is a look into the future of where we are, coming and touching Jesus, embracing, accepting what Jesus has to offer, who he is, the Redeemer, touching him. Now, it reads this way. I believe he did not know this was going to happen. And you could argue, well, I believe he had a word of knowledge ahead of time. Because of the way the text flows, I believe there is more on the side that I've chosen to take than on your side. He knew it all in advance ahead of time. I do not believe that he was ministering as God Almighty. And so inside of his mind, he had the mind of God Almighty, and he was thinking, as I think he was a man. I think he laid aside some of his heavenly splendor. The Bible tells us that he did. I don't think we can comprehend what was the magnitude of that. He was born without sin. He was conceived of the Holy Spirit. But I believed he made it clear he was watching his Father. He was only doing what he saw his Father doing. He was the representation of the Father in the earth. He was the perfect representation of the Father in the earth. You are now seeing a representation of the Father. And I think it's when Jesus, not because he was wrong, because I think he was at that moment focused on Jairus, but the Father was attentive. That's what I think this was. Now, a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, isn't that fascinating? He had a daughter who was sick for 12 years. She had a flow of blood for 12 years. Do you think there's a bigger hand at work? Well, you can say, that's just a coincidence. Wow, it's a pretty fascinating coincidence. Do you think it's possible that God, in his foreknowledge, knew what was happening, organized this thing for it to take place at that time period? She still had to act on it. She still had to act in that direction. He would see a woman 12 years issue but he had to rise above something. She didn't belong there. She should not have been there according to the law, because she had an issue of blood. She was unclean. She was supposed to yell, unclean, unclean, so everybody around her could get free of her. That's what she, and if anybody in that crowd knew that, the ruler of the synagogue would have known it. He would have known it. He could have been so put off by that. She touched him. I can't let him into my house now. Now, he just wasn't any individual. He was a ruler of the synagogue. He knew the rules. He could have been waylaid by that. Oh my goodness, he's been touched by an unclean woman. Now what am I going to do? When you're standing on the rim, all kinds of things can happen. The Midianites, they started panicking. Do you think everybody stood there thinking, okay, well, they're panicking. They're not going to panic in my direction at all. No, of course not, because they'll see this light and they won't come to the light. They'll try and get away from this huge beacon that I have in the sky. I'm sure they had opportunity for all kinds of thoughts as they stood there, blowing a trumpet, yelling, the sword of the Lord. And Gideon too, putting a torch in the air, no doubt where they were. I believe that's the point. When you study those 300, they were fully in. They were fully in. Jairus was fully in. He had several things that could have easily waylaid him. The woman with the issue of blood was fully in. So here it goes. Now, a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, and I've quoted out of Mark, but rather grew worse. Mark includes that detail. She was tended to by the physicians, I'm assuming most of the 12 years, maybe all of the 12 years. She used what resources she had. She was growing worse. There was no help. She would have been desperate. She would have been looking for help. And all the ways medically that were available to her, she pursued them as much as she had resources. But nothing was helping her, and she was getting worse. So this is the second city. The first city is Jairus' daughter's dying, and he knows it. So it goes on. And Luke 8:44 came from behind. She came from behind and touched the border of his garment. One of the accounts says the hem of his garment. She touched the border of his garment. And out of Mark's account, Mark 5:28, for she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. That was incredible that she said that. She had to rise above Jewish laws that were in existence for 1,000 years. She had to rise above that. She shouldn't have been by law there. She shouldn't have been on the street. She should have been yelling, unclean, unclean. She had an issue. In her, it was, I'm interpreting that it essentially was continuous for 12 years. It could stop and start every other day or what have you, but I'm under the impression she had some degree of a flow of blood, an issue of blood for 12 years. She had to be in terrible condition. If only I may touch his clothes, which was illegal, and it was Christ. And laying on the ground on the other side of Jesus, so it's like you got a ruler of the Jews laying on the ground in front of Jesus, and at the backside of Jesus you got this woman with an issue of blood, unclean by Jewish ceremonial uncleanly laws, and she's going to touch his garment, and he's asking him to come to his house. I do not believe Jesus was watching both through his eyes and his Honda camera out the back. And immediately, her flow of blood stopped. I believe this is a look into the future because we do not, with our eyes, see the manifest person of Jesus Christ in person, the man standing before us. You may say, well, I'm able to visualize that. Okay. It's so real that he's in my heart. I can visualize that. Okay. And immediately the flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, who touched me? I do not think he knew, because he saw it out of his rear view camera, and he knew ahead of time that the whole event was going to take place, but he knew something happened to him. He knew there was a release. I'm suggesting you are watching the Father work. You're watching. Jesus said, I don't do the works. The Father in me. He does the works. If he wasn't actively exercising his faith in the promises that were the Old Testament promises that told what the Messiah would do, the healings that he would do, Jesus was fulfilling promises. I believe he was standing on promises of what would take place. I believe it was the Father who was in him. We stand on the promises of what Jesus would do, he has done. So we stand on what he's done. I believe he was standing on what the Scriptures said he would do. And it was the Father who was within him doing the work. He said that clearly. It's the Father in me that does the works. I believe you're watching the Father work. In this instance of the woman with the issue of blood. But it was illegal. Maybe my view of God's view of healing and when healing is available to who, maybe it's all mixed up. I think ours is. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied it, Peter arose. There's a fourth character. There's really four characters in this story. Five, God the Father, the indwelling Father. He said the Father's in me and I'm in him, the indwelling Father. Peter. And when all denied it, so everybody around him denied it, Peter and those with him said, man, come on, get with it. The multitudes throng and press you. I've looked up those words. They mean that. The people were pressing against him. He was being touched on all accounts. Have you been in a crowd? Have you been able to walk through a crowd? And people wanted to get close to you. I have lots of experience walking through crowds, and my goodness, get touched on all sides. That's what Peter was saying. What do you mean, who touched you? Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, who touched me? So Peter was a bit incredulous. Why are you saying this? You're surrounded by people. But Jesus said, somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me. Now that he sensed. I do not believe he had foreknowledge of a word of knowledge that came to him. There is going to be a woman. Well, I knew about that. I knew about you. You got what you came for, didn't you? That is not what happened. But Jesus said, somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me. He did sense the flow. What I believe is the Father was watching. Jesus was not unattentive. Jesus was not offline. I believe he was fully online. He was dealing with the Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue. And I believe he was preparing, if not, I'm assuming Jairus had gotten up, but Jairus, I'm sure, is watching this that's going on. And he has to rise above it. For I perceive power going out from me. And this is the New Living Translation. I love this verse, so I've included Luke 8:46. But Jesus said, somebody deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me. I love the way it says that. Because she did. She deliberately touched him. I love the declaration. Somebody deliberately touched me. Because I felt healing power. And I believe that's the way it is. The healing that Jesus purchased for us is available to us all the time. It's always available to us. Because it's been done. It's just like if somebody comes to you and says, I'm not born again, and I'm telling you I have such a weight of sin in my life, and I'm not born again, I've never been to church, I've done everything wrong that you could possibly, even kick the cat, I'm a cat kicker, and everything, and I don't know how to deal with my sin, and it just, I feel so heavy with the weight of sin that's on the inside of me, and somebody said Jesus has done something about that, and I've begged him at night, Jesus, would you do something about this sin? I don't know what to do. I don't know what you can do, but would you do something about the sin? But nothing seems to take place, and they're having a talk with you, and you say to him, he's already done what he's going to do. He already did it. He died on Calvary. He died. He paid the penalty for sin. He went to hell for you. He was risen from the dead, ascended on high. His blood was accepted. He's not going to die for you. He already has. He's died for you. It's already done. What you have to do is believe and accept that, embrace it by faith, accept the grace of God that's been given in Jesus Christ, and by faith you accept what grace has provided. You just accept what Jesus has done. He did it for you. You were in his view. Humanity, everybody, it was in his view. That's what you would tell them. Healing is the same way because it was purchased at the same time. The stripes, by his stripes, we're healed. This clock says it's 11:48. That can't be right. Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all of the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. I believe it was the future. We're seeing the future played out in that. The Father was the one doing the work. He was fully aware of everybody and everything. And he said to her, daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. He didn't say, I'm now unclean. Your faith has made you whole. Now, Jairus is watching this. So he's heard she's had an issue of blood for 12 years, and it just stopped. He could be so waylaid by that. My goodness, he's unclean. He could have been waylaid by that. A powerful thing. I believe he had to deal with, as the ruler of the synagogue, Jesus he's surrounded by people. And he prostrated himself on the ground before him. I think that's number one. He had to deal with that. Number two, he had to deal with this woman who was ceremonially unclean, and Jesus was now ceremonially unclean by the laws because she touched his garment, and Jesus knew he had been touched. He had to deal with that. It would not have escaped his knowledge. And he had one more huge thing to deal with. Any of those, I believe, were huge. But while he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "She's dead. Your daughter's dead. She's dead. It's no use. It's done. It's all over. There is no help. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." Was he still going to stand on the rim? He had plenty of why not to stand on the rim and look to Jesus as the answer for his now dead, formerly sick daughter. But when Jesus heard it, he answered him saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." So, healing. She was all in. The woman with the issue of blood, she was all in. She was willing to risk violating what everybody would have known about. It was in Israel. She was willing to risk. She was all in. I'm there. Number two, the timing of the events and the similarities point to me to the love of God expressed through how much, through some, the match, through some match in their circumstances. I believe the love of God was expressed to Jairus. And he had that woman with the issue of blood. The timing of that, 12 years. His daughter, approximately 12 years of age. An encouragement, could have been an encouragement, and due to religion and due to laws, he could have just been so totally turned off by that. So, no, I'm done. She's dead. That woman's unclean. Jairus, he had to deal with remarkable obstacles to be all in, to stay all in. But I believe God was at work helping him in the similarities, just like when the angel went to Mary and said, you're going to conceive in your womb. And your cousin Elizabeth, she's already 6 months pregnant, who they said she can't bear. That's taken place. I believe God did that in part. There were many, many things, but in part to be a form of encouragement to Mary to believe the utter impossible. I believe in part this situation took place. I believe it showed the love of the Father for Jairus. Obviously, I think it showed the attentiveness to the Father to the woman. He was fully aware of her. All she had to do was touch. Because she had said, if I touch, I am going to be well. Remarkable declaration of faith. Healing is for all, is the will of God. I believe in that instance you're seeing what is the Father's will. Jesus was the perfect representation image. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3. He's the perfect image of the Father. What does the Father look like? Look at Jesus. How would the Father approach needy humanity? Look at Jesus. And I believe in this instance, you see that the Father's healing is for all, is the will of God. It didn't take place outside of the will of God. I don't believe it took place under the knowledgeable initiation of Jesus. I believe he was giving himself to Jairus. But he knew, wow, something, healing virtue just left me. Somebody deliberately, I love the New Living Translation, somebody deliberately touched me. Healing is for all, is the will of God. What do I think these stories say? The sickness unto death and death is the will of God, seeing them healed. 12 years issue of blood. unclean. Breaking the law. You wouldn't have nominated this woman as Lawkeeper of the Year. Breaking the law. Healing is the will of God. Hopeless and helpless causes are included in God's healing provision. I believe both of them reflected these. They were hopeless and they were helpless. Helpless to do anything about it. It appeared hopeless to them. Hopeless and helpless causes are included in God's healing provision. I believe this story says that. Both of them were hopeless and helpless. Both. Receiving the grace of healing through Jesus is in our court. This may be the most difficult. Her receiving the healing of Jesus was not dependent on Jesus saw her, said, "Oh, you, okay, I'm going to take care of you right now." It was in her court. Receiving the grace of healing through Jesus is in our court. Meaning, she knew he was the provision. He was the source of healing. She knew that. And she knew all she had to do was touch him. That's all, even his garment. That's all she really needed to do was just touch his garment. That was in her hand. In a sense, she was carrying the ball. With Jairus, Jesus, in a sense, was carrying the ball, though Jairus had to stand on the rim. Healing is not on a case-by-case decision basis. If in every instance, for every person, Jesus had to, okay, it's the Father's will. Here, I'll lay hands on you. Okay. This one blatantly says he was not aware of it initially until the healing had taken place. The flow of healing virtue had taken place. The Father was. Healing is not on a case-by-case decision basis where God decides, okay, I know it's been provided. Will I let you be healed, Jesus? Will what he did cover you or not? It is not a case-by-case decision. It has already been decided by his stripes you were healed. Healing is based on provision, not performance or position. Both of those stories. What was it based on? Provision. One of them had position. One of them did not have the performance. She. Healing is not based on provision. It is based on what the provision is, not the position you occupy or don't occupy, or the performance, how good you have done or how terrible you have been. It's not based on performance. By their laws, she was completely wrong. She spoke to her mountain in her faith. Her mountain was herself, her house, her land. If I touch him, I'll be made whole. Which was a remarkable declaration. Something profound had occurred in her heart to believe that Jesus was the source. Faith is our believing response to the provision of God in Jesus, for by grace through faith. Faith is our believing response. It's our believing response to something that has been provided. Our faith doesn't create it. It's already been created. It's already waiting on us. It's waiting on us in the provision of Jesus Christ. Just like for our sins, so for our sicknesses. Faith is our believing response to the provision of God in Christ. It is based first and foremost on what God has done for us in Jesus. And that's what our faith is in. Not our faith in ourselves, not our faith in faith. Our faith is in the provision of God in Christ. And watching Jesus, I believe, is the purest example of what is the Father's intent, heart and intent toward healing. And what I'll call the bridge time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the new covenant that we are under. I'm not trying to start a doctrine and say, but that bridge time period where Jesus fulfilled the old covenant. I believe he was acting on promises of the old covenant, but now we act on the provision of Jesus who fulfilled the promises of the Old Testament. It's a simple way for me to just think of it in three little tiny section, but all of life changed in that section that Jesus fulfilled. For by grace you've been saved through faith. So 1 Peter 2:24 says, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. And it says, by whose wounds you have been healed. He did both at the same time. Okay. Can I have 7 minutes? There's no yeses. Okay. I guess pardon? Take it? 7 minutes? Okay, I want you to watch a 7-minute encouragement video testimony. This is Andrew Womack telling the story of a woman who acted on what Jesus had already done. And she spoke to it. It's a fascinating story. There's a tiny bit of intro. It's 7 minutes long. Please, can you start that? Thank you.
To talk to God about your problem. He said, talk to your problem about God. Tell your problem to be cast into the sea. Implied in that, if you think this through, means that you understand God has done his part, and he gave that power and authority to you, and you are taking your authority and speaking directly to the problem instead of asking God to deal with it. God is the one who has already done everything. Now it's up to you whether Satan flees from you. You have to resist the devil. James chapter 4 verse 7, and he will flee from you. You have to fight sickness and disease. You have to talk to it. This has been a real breakthrough in my life. When I started saying, pain in the name of Jesus, leave, it works. You know, a classic example, I know many of you have heard me give this, but it's still good. It's awesome. Anyway, people were watching the healing journey of Nikki Oshinsky, the very first person we ever put on one of our healing journeys. And she was in constant pain for 4 or 5 years. The doctor said he never expected to see her, and anyway, she got healed. The people saw that testimony and asked if I would pray for this woman, and I said sure. And they said, well, she's already on her way. She'll be here in 5 minutes. I prayed for this woman. This woman had all kinds of wrong thinking. She thought God gave her that sickness. God was getting glorified. And so I taught her some of the things that I taught you tonight, that no, God didn't give her this sickness, that it's God's will for her to be well. And I countered all of her doctrine. And after about 20 minutes of stuff, she says, all right, I'm ready to believe. So I prayed for her. I rebuked pain, spoke to the pain, and commanded pain to leave her body. She had had pain for 7 years. The doctor said on a scale of 1 to 10, her pain was a constant 11. And she had magnets taped to her body, and then magnets sewn into a blanket that she wrapped herself in, and somehow this magnetic field lessened the pain, and she had survived 2 years after the doctor said she'd be dead. But she was just in terrible shape. I prayed with her, commanded the pain to leave, and she took this blanket off, stood up, moved around. She says, I don't have any pain. First time in 7 years that she had been pain-free. But then she says, I have this burning or this stinging right here in my waist, in the back. What's the deal with that? And I said, you didn't tell me you had stinging. You told me you had pain. I didn't talk to stinging. So I said, watch this. And I spoke to stinging and commanded stinging to be gone, and it was gone. And then I took Mark chapter 11, verse 23, and taught her these things. Man, I'm talking as fast as I can talk. I hadn't got time to... Let me just say this. Healing faith is voice activated. God created the heavens and the earth by words. Your body, every virus, every bacteria, trees, respond to words. Jesus spoke to the fig tree and cursed it, and it died. Words are the parent creative force of all living matter. Words will affect your body, will affect sickness, disease. It affects the devil. You overcame the devil by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Words are powerful. Words are how you release your faith. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Words are how you release your faith. So I spoke to that woman's body and pain to the stinging in 11. I taught her these things, and as she was getting ready to leave, it was like 45 minutes after she first came in, probably 20 minutes after she was healed, and I'd given her some instruction. She was getting ready to leave. She put her hand on the doorknob, and she just froze, and she turned around and looked at me, and she says, "The stinging is back." And I said, "Well, I've been teaching you what to do." So I said, "I want you to pray. I'll let you lead the prayer, and I'll agree with you." So I just joined hands with this woman, and she started praying. And you got to remember that 45 minutes before, she was a Presbyterian that believed God made her sick to get glory out of it. She didn't know come here from Sikkim about the Word of God. Many of you don't know come here from Sikkim either. In Texas, that's the way we say Sikkim is like you say Sikkim to a dog. That's go away, go get them. Come here is the opposite. And so if you don't know come here from Sikkim, you don't know very much, amen. So anyway, this woman, just 45 minutes before, had been basically ignorant of these things. I taught her the Word, and she prayed a great prayer for a person that had been a Presbyterian 45 minutes before. And this is nearly word for word what she said. She says, "Father, I thank you that by your stripes I was healed. If I was healed, I am healed. It is your will to heal me. I claim my healing in Jesus' name. By your stripes I was healed." And when she got through, I said, "So, do you still have the burning?" And she says, "Yes." And I said, "Do you know why?" And she said, "No." And I said, "That's not a good prayer." Most of you think, "Well, that's a great prayer." Those are all nice things to say, but it's not doing what Jesus told us to do. He told you to speak to the problem. She spoke to God and said wonderful things about Jesus and about it being His will, and those are good things to say. And by saying those things, she may have had faith come to her ears, because faith comes by hearing and hearing by the Word. So it may have built her up and helped her some, but it didn't do what God told her to do. And I said, the reason you still have that stinging is because you didn't talk to the stinging. And this woman says, "You mean I'm supposed to say stinging and talk to it like it's a person?" I said, "Absolutely." She said, "I'll do it." And so we joined hands again, and she said, she got mad. She said, "Stinging in the name of Jesus." And she stopped, and she says, "It's gone." That's all she had to say. Amen. See, that's understanding your authority. It is God's will for you to be well. That's number one. Number two, God's already done His part. He's already healed you. You don't have to approach Him as a beggar and ask and wonder, will He do it? He's already done it. Now it's up to you to take your authority and you resist the devil, and he will flee from you. James chapter 4, verse 7. You have...
And if you can, everybody said, amen. So here we are. Fascinating. Two people, tale of two cities, on the rim. Both of them were on the rim. Both of them were fully on the rim. So in part, I'm asking for those of you who pray for people at the end of the service, please do not pray for them to be healed. Please do not pray over them what Jesus has done. Please ask them, what is it that needs to be healed? And that because of what Jesus has done, speak to it and command it to be healed. Command it to leave if it's something that needs to leave. Command it. Speak to the mountain. That in essence is the mountain. Speak to the mountain. The provision. It is based on what Jesus has done. It is not based on how much you think you know. It is not based on you. Because of what Jesus has done, you speak to it, as I think you saw a terrific example.